Yes, correct. Now that we're recording, Keith, you should not admit to murder. So here are some of the terms from the case study that we started with last week. Hypoventilating was one of them, and that referred to a lower breathing rate. Bradycardia, which is a lower heart rate. Cyanotic or cyanosis is the result of having low blood oxygen levels. Diaphoresis is excessive sweating. Paresthesias, like a tingly feeling. I would kind of describe it like that pins and needles feeling that you get if you've like crossed your legs or slept on your arm for a long time and then kind of let it move around. Motor dysfunction, the inability to move muscles or move them properly. Ascending paralysis, the inability to move body parts, and ascending meaning kind of like spreads. Headache, a pain in the head. We all know that, but here's the important part. Caused by swelling of the blood vessels. Nausea, a feeling of having to vomit, low blood pressure, okay? So here were some of the symptoms and terms that we need to be aware of. And again, our goal over the course of this semester is to use what we learn about the different organ systems to be able to explain why the tetrodotoxin in the pufferfish caused all of this to happen in Dr. Westwood.
So, Ms. Rosema.
Yeah.
So were we supposed to find these, or like or they were listed somewhere, or we had to do research, right?
All of the above. So they came from the Dr. Westwood case study.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had to find the symptoms and terms in the case study and then research what they meant.
Okay.
All right. So we went over that. Let's look at our initial questions here. So your homework assignment then from last Wednesday was to write some initial questions we could research in order to better understand what was happening with Dr. Westwood. So I haven't attached anyone's names to it, so they are still anonymous. And it's going to maybe look like there weren't very many, but that's because I didn't put any repetition. So a lot of us had the same types of questions, so I didn't put because that would just be redundant, okay? All right, so how does the toxin get to the rest of the body once it's eaten? How is this case different from regular food poisoning? Why do symptoms like nausea, headache, and diaphoresis seem to happen at the same time? So this person recognized, like often if you feel nauseous or like you're gonna throw up or maybe pass out, you kind of get all these symptoms together at once, so why? What is the function of alveoli in our lungs? How do pufferfish produce tetrodotoxin? Do certain parts of the pufferfish contain the toxin, or is it the whole fish? What does tetrodotoxin actually do to our nerve cells? How does our blood oxygen level change? What happens with the tetrodotoxin and the sodium channels? How does tetrodotoxin cause symptoms like bradycardia, hypoventilating, and paresthesias? And how does oxygen get into our bloodstream? Okay, so these are some of the questions we are then going to try and answer as we work through this semester. All right, so right now, if we could go into Canvas, in case you are not already. Again, we're always going to go into modules. We have done all the way through 1.07, and I'm going to kind of save the answer for 1.07 as we start today's notes. All right. So as someone put in their survey at the beginning of class, you are going to take notes in here. You can predict you're going to take notes about once a week in this class. It is a college level anatomy and physiology class with high school level activities. So knowing that, there is just a lot of information that has to get delivered, okay? Now, what I recommend when we take notes is for you to actually physically take out paper and something to write with, and that you actually follow along and handwrite notes just like you would if you were sitting in person in this room with me. I know you're sitting on the other side of the computer and you're like, I don't want to do that, and you can't make me because I'm not in front of you, and that's completely correct. But writing does actually help you process information and retain it. And it also helps you, as you're processing it, be able to realize when you have questions about something, confusions, and you need me to clear something up. If you're just sitting over there and the words are going in one ear and out the other, you don't really know what you don't know, and you don't know how to ask for help then, okay? So I would recommend you taking out paper and something to write with, but that is your own personal choice. If you don't want to do that, you know, do you, I guess. Okay, so we are going to take notes here. Does anyone have any questions before we get started taking our notes?
Can we ever use like notes on quizzes and tests?
Yeah, because you won't have any.
Okay.
Your assessments are all models, which are significantly more difficult than a test or quiz. That was my way of getting around the remote learning. All right. So we are going to talk about nerves, neurons, and nerve impulses. Today, we're really just going to talk about neurons. Okay. So we are actually going to start by watching a video. So often I will show a short video before I start talking about content. That way you can kind of visually see and hear what I'm about to teach and explain. So hopefully then when I teach and explain it, you have something to kind of build off of. So we're going to start with this.
Your body communicates with itself both electrically and chemically. Your nervous system, which includes your brain, spinal cord, and all of the nerves, will use electrical and chemical messages to allow you to move, smell, see, feel pain, and think. The nervous system is an internal communication system. The main cell of the nervous system is the neuron. The neuron transmits nerve impulses, which are electrical signals, and then it sends chemicals to the next neuron across a very small gap between them. The typical neuron has the same basic features. The cell body contains the nucleus and many organelles, and has long tendrils projecting from it called dendrites. These dendrites pick up signals from their environment or other neurons. A signal will travel from the dendrite to the long axon. Some axons can be even several feet long. The axons carry the signal to the end of the axon, often called the axon terminal, where messages are then sent in the form of chemicals to the next cell. A nerve impulse travels very quickly, about 1 meter per second. But many nerve fibers have a way to transmit signals up to 100 times faster. Special cells called Schwann cells will grow around the axon in wrapped layers like a cinnamon roll. Each wrap creates a coating of myelin and phospholipid bilayers, which act similarly to an insulator on an electrical wire. In between each Schwann cell is a small gap of exposed axon called a node of Ranvier. These nodes are important for speeding up the impulse. In a myelinated axon, the electrical impulse jumps quickly from node to node instead of moving continuously along the length of the axon. This jumping of the nerve impulse is called saltatory conduction. Salta means jump in Latin. And impulses can travel up to 100 meters per second. That's fast. Thank you for watching this episode of Teacher's Pet. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow me on Twitter at SciencePet.
All right. So yeah, just a quick introduction, something to build off of. No. All right, so what is a neuron? A neuron is a nerve cell, or the cell that makes up our nervous system. There are two types of neurons we're going to talk about in here: multipolar neurons and unipolar neurons. Now, regardless of what type it is, all neurons have the same basic structural components. They have dendrites, a cell body, an axon, myelin sheath, and an axon terminal. The dendrites are going to receive the incoming messages. The cell body is like a processing center that is going to integrate and process all of the incoming messages. The axon is like this long cable cord that goes out from the cell body, sending outgoing messages. The myelin sheath is this kind of fatty tissue that wraps around that long cord or axon and insulates it to help increase the speed of a nerve impulse or message. And at the very end are the axon terminals. And the axon terminals are a final destination of an outgoing message, and it's where neurotransmitters are released. So neurons are the cells of our nervous system that do all of the communicating back and forth from body parts to and from our brain and spinal cord. And so you can think of them as little tech structures. You know, we have little wires that receive messages, a place that processes the message, another little wire that is going to send outgoing messages. And then these chemicals that are released from the axon terminals are going to make the next thing happen. And that could depend on where it is in the body. Another message, it could make an organ do something, just depends what needs to happen. And so we'll look at some pictures of this, so hopefully that will help as well. If at any point as I'm going over something you have any questions, remember to just drop it in the chat. And I will awkwardly pause for a little bit after talking in case people that are writing need another minute or so. All right, does anyone need more time on the slide? Okay. All right, so here's kind of our traditional basic diagram of a neuron. I'm going to start on the left-hand side and talk over to the right. So the left-hand side, we kind of see what I might describe like tree branches connected to a fried egg. And those purple tree branches that we see are the dendrites. And they're the parts of a nerve cell that are going to receive incoming messages. So these could be messages coming from our surroundings when they pick up on stimuli like changes in temperature, hot and cold, if something's painful, if something touched our skin. It could be incoming messages from our brain. Those messages then go to the little fried egg region, the cell body, and the cell body is going to integrate and process these. Now, these incoming messages are prioritized first by reflex. Reflexes are pre-programmed responses that our body deems necessary to kind of maintain balance or homeostasis in ourselves. And so they're more of life or death responses. So reflexes will always be prioritized to go out first. Then everything else is usually based off priority based on our memory. So past experiences that we've had have significant impact on how and when our body responds to things. The outgoing message then is sent from the cell body down this yellow cord here, which is the axon. And you'll notice that along this axon, it looks like there's these little nuggets wrapped around it. That's the myelin sheath. So you can kind of think of just like all of your electrical cords, right? The actual wires are deep inside those cords, the metal parts. So those actual metal parts would be the axon on the neuron. But we wrap our electrical cords in tape, in rubber, in plastic, because it insulates it, guaranteeing that that electrical signal will be sent faster and remain where it's supposed to. So we do the same thing in neurons. We wrap the axon in a myelin sheath to help increase the rate at which a message is sent down that axon. On the far right side then, we see these little squiggly tentacles, and those are the axon terminals. It's the final destination of an outgoing message, and axon terminals release a chemical called neurotransmitters again, and the neurotransmitter could stimulate another message to be sent. It could stimulate an organ to do something, like your stomach to release stomach acid or your heart to beat and pump. And then here's just a slightly different view of this. And I put this picture in here because I always like kids to remember that even though the cell looks nothing like cells you might remember from middle school or looking at diagrams in textbooks or anything, it is still a cell. It is just specifically structured to fit its function. In the cell body, it still has all these organelles and structures inside of it that actually help with its ability to function properly, just like all the cells in our body. All right, so remember that I said there are two types of neurons, unipolar and multipolar neurons. The first one we're going to talk about are unipolar neurons. Unipolar neurons are used by our body to send afferent or sensory input messages. All right, so what does this really mean? Well, these neurons are going to pick up on stimuli. Stimuli refers to anything that happens around the cell. That's it, any change. So if we use the cells in my hand to refer to that, it could be touching something, again, change in temperature, hot and cold, something painful, pressure. Inside my body, it could be a change in pressure, a change in how acidic or basic the blood is in my body. So something that's happening around the cell, some sort of change, that's a stimuli. That message then, that there's been some sort of stimulus or change, gets sent to the central nervous system as fast as possible through these unipolar neurons. Unipolar neurons don't make any decisions. They don't process the information. They literally just pick it up and send it to your brain as fast as possible. Your brain and spinal cord then will decide what needs to happen. So unipolar neurons are picking up on sensations inside or outside the body, or sensory and afferent input, and sending that immediately to our central nervous system to let it know that this change has been detected. So because of that, unipolar neurons look a little different. Their cell body is in the center of the axon, and it's actually usually pretty tiny. And that's because it doesn't need a big cell body to process and integrate or prioritize any of the incoming messages. Its job is to just send messages from point A to B in whatever order they come in. So the dendrites are also not connected to the cell body because, again, it doesn't matter what the message is, where it came from. The job of the unipolar neuron is to just pick up on it and relay that to the central nervous system as fast as possible. All right, I will awkwardly wait another minute. And once again, as I'm going over anything, if you have any questions, make sure you ask in the Zoom chat. right, does anyone need more time? It's okay if you do. All right. So in this diagram, this is a picture of a unipolar neuron. So let's notice a couple things right away, okay? On the right-hand side is where the dendrites are. Okay, so that's gonna pick up on the incoming stimulus. So it could be a change of, there's been a significant temperature change and it's really hot. Your blood has become really acidic. There is a toxin. There is something heavy pressing against these dendrites. That change then goes as fast as possible from the right side here to the left side to your brain. So you see the cell body here in the center. It's not connected to the dendrites, and it's a little bit smaller because it doesn't actually need to process or prioritize anything. The job is to pick up on stimuli over here on the right side and get it to the left as fast as possible. Now, the other type of neuron we mentioned was a multipolar neuron. Multipolar neurons send efferent or motor output messages. So what does that mean? That means that these neurons send outgoing messages from the central nervous system to some organ or body part to make it do something. These neurons do have to prioritize message by importance. So again, anything that's a reflex goes first. Anything that is deemed life-saving or necessary to maintain stability goes next. And then it's usually based off memory after that. The messages that are coming from multipolar neurons are going to make organs and body parts do things. So it's going to make your intestines contract. It's going to make your stomach release gastric juice. It's going to make your lungs inhale or exhale. Multipolar neurons are usually the ones shown in diagrams. And in fact, our first diagram we looked at was a multipolar neuron. The cell body in that is directly connected to the dendrites. The cell body is also larger. And again, that's because it does have to process and prioritize the messages coming from the central nervous system. Now, like any cells in your body, some neurons are so tiny that we can barely even see them with a microscope. But you also have some neurons where the axon is the length of 2/3 of your body. One single cell, and that axon is super long. So just depending on the body parts that's connected by these neurons and what type of messages have to be sent determines the size and quantity of them in different areas. All right, I'll pause again. All right, does anyone need more time here? Okay. So this looks similar to the diagram we looked at the very beginning. If I start on the left and look at it right, on the left-hand side here, our little branched dendrites are connected to where it says CNS. That's an abbreviation for the central nervous system. So they're going to receive kind of like a decision from our brain and spinal cord of what needs to happen. It goes in through the dendrites again, gets processed by the cell body, goes out the axon, And eventually the axon terminals will reach an organ or body part that needs to do something. So maybe I need to jerk my hand away from a hot stove. It could stimulate the muscles in my arms. Again, it could reach my lungs. Maybe I need to increase how fast I'm breathing or decrease it. And so in order to make those body parts do things, we mentioned before that these chemicals called neurotransmitters get released from the axon terminals. Now, before we can talk about neurotransmitters, we need to understand that there is a little bit of a space between the axon terminals and the organ, muscle, tissue, whatever is going to be stimulated. That space between the axon terminals and the next thing is called a junction. And the junction is the meeting of two neurons or a neuron in an organ. There is a slight space or gap in between there, and the axon terminals of one is going to release a chemical that diffuses across to the next organ or neuron. Once that neurotransmitter binds to the next thing, if it's a neuron, it's going to stimulate another messenger nerve impulse. If it's an organ, it's going to make the organ do something. And our body produces hundreds of these different types of neurotransmitters. Some of them stimulate very specific things. So they stimulate muscle contractions. They stimulate the release of acid in our stomach. Some stimulate emotional responses in us, like serotonin or dopamine. And again, I will pause for a minute. All right, does anyone need more time? Okay. So in this picture here, it actually shows in the very top left corner here, we actually see at a distance far away the dendrites and cell body of a neuron. This long squiggly piece here is the axon that the outgoing message would go out of. And at the very end is the axon terminal. Those little purple bubbles that you see are little packets of chemical or neurotransmitter. And so you can see here, they get released out of the terminal. They float across that little synapse or little space, and they're going to stick to whatever is on the other side. So it could be another neuron, or it could be an organ. All right, we're going to watch another video to kind of wrap up what we talked about.
A nerve impulse is an electrical current that travels along dendrites or axons due to ions moving through voltage-gated channels in the neuron's plasma membrane. Voltage-gated.
Okay, so again, just take a second to process that. In this picture here, on the left-hand side, the branches are the dendrites. They receive incoming messages. My little fried egg looking area is the cell body that processes it. The long yellow stringer cord is the axon, which could be wrapped in a myelin sheath. And at the end here, my little tentacles are the axon terminals that can release a neurotransmitter.
Channels open and close in response to an electrical voltage, so they are affected by changes in electrical charge around them. When a neuron is at rest, a charge difference is maintained between the inside and outside of the cell. This charge difference is produced and maintained largely by active transport using sodium-potassium pumps. The pumps send sodium ions out of the cell and bring potassium ions in, while other channels allow some flow of potassium ions back out of the cell. The sodium ions cannot easily get back in to replace the lost positive charges.
Okay, so I'm going to pause here again. We're going to get into the details of this in our next class. But the reason I want to show this is to kind of remind all of us, those atoms and elements that you learned about in chemistry in 10th grade, they still apply to this class. All living things, right, on the most basic level are made of those different types of atoms or elements that you learned about in chemistry. And how those different atoms and elements interact with each other and move throughout our cells determines a lot of functions and mechanisms in our bodies. And one of them are these messages we've been talking about, right? They're not actual like letters, emails, or text messages sent through our neurons. When we say that our cells are communicating with each other or sending messages, we're actually referring to a very intricate sequence and almost domino effect of chemicals that move and interact with each other, okay? But again, we will get more into that in the next class. So my goal today was just to get through those slides in our notes. You do have a practice assignment. This assignment is not due until Sunday the 14th, so this upcoming Sunday. However, it is a little bit lengthy. So what I would recommend is that tonight and tomorrow night, you start just kind of picking around and working on some of it, trying to answer the questions that relate to the notes that we went over and the ones that you can easily answer. Then in our next class on Wednesday, we're going to finish our notes on nerve impulses. And I would then again recommend that Wednesday and Thursday night, you again try to go through and answer the questions that you can. And if you struggle to find answers to anything, or you're not quite sure how to answer something, again, you can always email me or anything that you're comfortable with so that I can help you out in your homework, okay? But again, that homework assignment is not due till Sunday, but it's not due till Sunday because it's a little bit bigger. And we are taking 2 days of notes that go over it, okay? To make sure we understand where we can access that, it is a couple module clicks forward. Okay, so here were our notes today, 1.08 notes. The practice is right here, the 1.10 practice. Oh, you don't even have access to that yet. Was someone gonna yell at me? You guys are like, no, no one's gonna yell at you. Well, you should. Okay. This class is so quiet, even in the chat. So just like all of our assignments in here, you'll be able to click on the blue assignment link, open it up. Okay, this homework assignment is a combination of some basic vocab practice and some diagram practice. Comes straight from our notes. And again, it's not that it's necessarily super difficult, but it is lengthier. So I would recommend, again, starting tonight or right now even, by looking through and trying to answer the questions that come to you from the notes. And then working on a little bit more Wednesday after we get our next notes. And then emailing me when you have any questions or problems, okay? So we have this class till 11:05. Remembering that we have a different schedule this semester, okay? Your next class starts at 11:10. So from this point to 11:05, I would like you to start working on this practice. And then remember at 11:10, you have to go to your third hour, okay? Does anyone have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. All right. Well, then you can start working on that. And if you do have any questions, of course, let me know so that I can help you, okay?